A figure sighed as he looked at the scroll that had arrived at noon. It contained details of the Fourth Shinobi War that had occurred in the elemental nations, but surprisingly it wasn't hidden villages against each other. In fact, it was all 5 great hidden villages, as well as all the other smaller hidden villages against Akatsuki and the Hidden Sound Village. Turns out both Madara Uchiha and Orochimaru bolstered their forces with missing nins and thugs to rival the other hidden villages in terms of manpower, and it seemed that they were winning, especially since they were using the biju that they extracted out of their Jinchuriki. So far they had the Aikibi, Sanbi, Yanbi, Gobi, Rokubi and the Hachibi, but they didn't have the Nibi, Nanabi or the Kyubi. Nibi's Jinchuriki was cornered by Akatsuki, but then a stranger came and literally obliterated the Akatsuki members Hidan and Kakazu. Following that, the Jinchuriki just disappeared of the face of the elemental nations. The Nanabi's Jinchuriki was a different story. She was being hunted by her own villagers who wanted to beat her for being a Jinchuriki, but after she had rounded into an alleyway she found a dead end. When they were about to attack her though, they were slaughtered and the Jinchuriki was gone. Finally, the Kyubi's Jinchuriki simply vanished after he had been exiled. Many people had looked for him, but they had no luck in finding him. That was 10 years ago, Naruto thought as he sighed again as he contemplated on what to do. So far the scroll had stated that they would like an alliance to combat the Akatsuki and Orochimaru. However, in order to make it more persuasive, they even added in how likely they were to attack his own nation once the elemental nations were overrun. Now after that subtle message, Naruto had half a mind to refuse the alliance. After all, his nation was so far away that by the time they arrived, they would be tired and not effective in combat. That, and the barrier that shuts down the chakra in a person's body, would render them useless in battle. You see, the world was split into 2 continents, the East and the West. The East became known as the Elemental Nations and the West recently became known as the United Whirlpool Nation. The reason for the division was because during the fight between the Rakudo Sennin and the Jubi unleashed a strange attack that made all the inhabitants in the West lose their chakra and their chakra network. After the battle, people who could use chakra started seeing those who couldn't as inferior, and eventually prejudice started to grow. Only the Shodaime Hokage, the Senju clan and the Uzumaki clan saw them as regular people, but eventually it wasn't enough to stop the hatred, so they asked the Shodaime to split the land in half and send them far away. After some tough resistance from the Shodaime, he eventually agreed. Then, using his control over wood, the Shodaime split the land in half. His brother Tobarama Senju then used his control over water to push the west far away so that it would be extremely difficult to cross between the two, bordering impossible. In the end, it made both of them very tired and had to spend a little while in a hospital to recover from the effort. Back to the present, when Naruto arrived and united the West, he decided to make it better, if not through chakra then technology. The result was absolutely stunning. Buildings made of bricks and metal instead of wood, weapons that made the Yondaime Hokage's Hiraishin look primitive, a navy that dwarfs the wooden boats the East use, medical facilities were more efficient than even Tsunade, communications that made the East's shortwave radios became toys that were beaten by kids' walkie-talkies, and overall everyone was happy. And, imagine the continent with cities along the edge that faces the East with the suburbs just behind them and the countryside behind them. There was no crime or corruption, all of it wiped out before it could fester and grow. People were supportive of just about everything he did. His title as leader of the United Whirlpool Nation was sort of passed down through the family, but if they were seen as not worthy, then another would be chosen. Once chosen though, they would permanently stay in as leader and no one can remove them, and all the decisions are final, nobody else could defy them. Looking through the pros and cons of the proposition, he saw a chance at gaining something from this. Then he placed the scroll down onto his desk made of oak and glanced around his office. It was painted white and had a kind of government feel to it. At one end of the room was his desk and large leather chair. Large windows behind him showed the view of his nation that he ruled, and also a flag of his nation, which was white with the Uzumaki clan symbol in the center. In front of him were 2 leather couches that were perpendicular to his desk with a small table between them. On the other end of the room was the only door that the room had. Looking back on his life, he absently thought back to the day he was exiled after he had successfully completed his mission to bring back his old teammate, Sasuke Uchiha. Flashback. Naruto sat in a chair in the middle of Konoha's council room. After being healed of his wounds, he was curious as to why he was here. He had already filed his report away, so why be summoned here, and specifically only him? Wouldn't Shikamaru be a better choice because of his status as the leader at the time? Looking around, he noticed the civilian council were looking smug, whilst the shinobi council and the Hokage were looking sad. Okay, not a good sign, he thought. Whatever was going on, it wouldn't end well for him, that was a definite. An elderly man wrapped in bandages, Danzo Shimura his name was, then stood up and addressed the Uzumaki. Naruto Uzumaki. Due to inflicting a nearly fatal injury to your target Sasuke Uchiha, we have decided that you be banished and that all that connects you to Konoha stripped from you. In addition to this, your ability to form hand seals will be taken away from you, as well as all of your possessions and finance will be confiscated and given to Sasuke Uchiha as compensation, he stated smugly as Naruto was given chakra-absorbing handcuffs and then dragged out of the room before he could even comprehend or object to what had happened. Time skip, next day. It was the evening for when his banishment was scheduled, and during that time he had time to think about what had happened to him. He had completed his mission and had almost gotten killed by someone he thought was his brother in bond. Turns out that it had all been a ploy so that he could gain the Mangekyo Sharingan, and that he never really thought as Naruto as a brother, only as a tool to further his ambition to kill his brother. It was then that he also realized that his so-called crush Sakura Haruno had only used his feelings for her in order to get what she wanted, even if it meant him sacrificing himself. Safe to say his crush for the pink-haired Banshee stopped there and had no intention of returning. Soon though he received numerous visits from certain people. Almost the entire Konoha 12, now 11, came down and berated him for being Adobe. Sasuke even punched him in the chest for good measure, Sakura punched him in the head and called him a failure, both Hinata and Neji gave him some juken blows that were painful but not lethal, Ino kicked him when he was on the floor, Kiba had Akamaru urinate on him, and Tenten cut him with some of her kunai. The only ones of the Konoha 11 to not turn up were Choji, Shikamaru, Lee and Shino. Choji was too kind to blame him for anything, Shikamaru was too smart to be bought into it, Lee just didn't like hitting people who couldn't fight back, especially when said person was Adobe like him, and Shino was also too smart to be brought into it. By the end Naruto was still very much alive but in pain and smelling like urine. His suffering hadn't finished there though, as his sensei, Kakashi Hatake, came down and scolded him for hurting his teammate. He didn't even care to notice the state of his student before he declared that he was no longer a student of his, that if he ever said he was a student of his then he would deny it, and walked away from the broken boy before he could even say a thing. After a couple of hours it was time for his banishment, and he was roughly grabbed and dragged through the village. Along the way he was greeted with jeers and insults from villagers, shinobi and his peers. Then one of the villagers became more bold by throwing a tomato at his head, and then more joined in. When they reached the gates he was covered in all kinds of rotten food. They then had Danzo apply the seal to his arms to prevent him from forming the hand seals for jutsu, and just before he left he glanced back to notice the seldom looks from Tsunade, Shizune, Iruka, Shino, Shikamaru, Choji, Lee, Asuma, Guy, Kurenai, Anko Mitarashi, Konohamaru, Odin, Mogi, Toichi and Iyame. From that alone he knew who were friend and who were foe. He then ran as fast as he could away from the village, with many people cheering as his form disappeared from sight down the paved road. End flashback. Half a year later he had been reversed summoned by the Toad Elders Fukasaku and Shima to ask him why he hadn't summoned any of them in such a long time. After he explained to them about his banishment, resulting with some very angry Toad Elders, he asked them to cancel his contract with them so that he couldn't be found by Konoha easily if they wanted to hunt him down for any non-reasonable excuses. They had been sad to realize the logic but accepted it, even though they asked if he could meet the Great Toad Sage as a goodbye. The Great Toad Sage sighed when he was told about the cancellation, though he did say that he somewhat predicted it would happen. His vision had said that something would happen to one of their summoners that would affect them greatly, and told him about the child of the prophecy. He even let a small tear out but accepted it as well, though he said that as a parting gift they would teach him senjutsu to combat his lack of hand seals. At the end of the training he had mastered senjutsu and learned sealing as well. He had tried using his knowledge to remove the seal that prevented his use of hand seals but discovered something horrible. The seal used hadn't been the standard one used on people who were banished. Instead this one destroyed his ability to use hand seals completely, so that meant he could forever no longer use hand seals and would have to rely on other ways to compensate for it. Namely weapons, fuinjutsu and taijutsu. Before he set off again the toads gave him the key to his seal that held the Kyuubi, telling him that it was his since it wouldn't be safe with them, as Jiraiya could take it with him at any time and that he could use it to reverse summon him as well if he couldn't do it via toads. And, remember, Jiraiya was not mentioned in the flashback, meaning nobody knows his reaction to Naruto's banishment yet. Soon after that he saved Yugito Ni, Nibi's container, and Fu, Nanabi's container, from both the Akatsuki and her own village respectively. They then traveled together and became very close. 5 years after his banishment they became a couple, with Yugito and Fu becoming Naruto's girlfriends. Another year later they married and decided to go to the west to get away from the hidden villages and the Akatsuki. On their arrival the place was just as conflicted as the east, but this changed as they traveled across it, helping people along the way. Eventually they united the continent and the United Whirlpool Nation was born. Naruto gained the title Uzukage and his two second-in-commands were his wives Yugito and Fu, who became well favored by everyone. The three also became the only chakra users that the West respected. Now with this alliance I could demand for my clan's heritage back that was stolen by the Fire Daimyo, Naruto thought with a scowl in place. Now some would think he was talking about Minato Namikaze, his father, but he was actually talking about his mother, Kushina Uzumaki. You see, when Uzushiogakure was destroyed by a combined effort of Iwa and Kumo, the Land of Fire's daimyo came in and claimed the land as his own without any consent from the survivors and threatened all of them with his large army of samurais that forced the survivors to flee. The reason his mother went to Konoha was because she thought she could get help from the Sandaime to stop the daimyo. Her plea was left unanswered as the Sandaime didn't want to risk a civil war that could be taken advantage of by the other nations, but stayed in Konoha as a necessity. Then due to her being the only Uzumaki in Konoha other than Mito Uzumaki, she had to become the second Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Later on she fell in love with Minato when he saved her from Kumo Nin, who wanted her for her special chakra that could subdue a Biju, and soon fell pregnant with Naruto. Then on the day of his birth the Kyuubi was ripped out of Kushina by Madara Uchiha and his father was forced to seal it inside of him when it was obvious the Kyuubi wouldn't stop rampaging even after the genjutsu on it had been released. Naruto wanted to take back what was his, especially since it was taken by someone who had no rights to it in the first place, but he wanted to do it without putting his nation at risk. The country had only been around for 4 years and some were still affected by the violence that existed before them. He didn't want to cause harm to his country because of him being selfish, no matter how many times he could be. Onto why he didn't want his father's inheritance was because there was no longer any to be claimed. Reason being, his father had placed a blood and time seal on the inheritance that prevented people from touching it without Naruto's blood, and if it wasn't done by the time he was 18 then the seal would destroy his inheritance to prevent anyone else from getting their hands on his jutsu. The reason why he knew about his parents without being told by anyone who knew at the time was because his own parents had told him when he tried to control the Kyuubi. They told him everything from his inheritance to the events that led to the Kyuubi's attack. At first he was angry at his father for the problems the Kyuubi gave him and even said that he wouldn't take the Namikaze name, but he did understand why he did it and would say he was his son. The only problem was that he would be taking on his Uzumaki side of the family as he had been brought up on the name Uzumaki, and that the Namikaze inheritance had been destroyed by the time blood seal on it too soon for him to do anything about it. His father had been sad that he couldn't pass on his Hiraishin jutsu to him, but admitted it was for the best because it wouldn't do good if someone like Sasuke Uchiha got his hands on it. His mother though was ecstatic that her son would be following in her footsteps by specializing in weapons and fuinjutsu. She also told him that if he wanted to learn how to use her chakra chains then he would need to find the ruins of Uzushiogakure and locate the scroll she hid that also contained her other techniques. After defeating the Kyuubi and gaining full control over his chakra, he said goodbye to his parents, which included being hugged by both of his parents, and they left him with tears in his eyes when they told him that they were proud of him and that they would always love him no matter what. They then disappeared, and it was then that he started creating a friendship with Kyuubi, who he discovered was called Kurama, and made his conditions more hospitable in the seal. Sighing again, he pressed the intercom to his wives and said, "Yugito-chan, Fu-chan, can you come here please?" "Sure, Naruto-kun." 10 minutes later his door opened and in stepped his two wives. Yugito wore dark blue jeans with a picture of a pink cat paw at the bottom of her right leg, white trainers, a white t-shirt that covered her C-cup breasts and had styled her hair in a bandaged tail that went down to the small of her back. Also on her were various exercise equipment for monitoring oneself, i.e. heart rate monitor and a watch. Following her was Fu, who wore similar to Yugito except it had a butterfly on her jeans and she wore a red t-shirt that covered her C-cup breasts. Other than that though they wore exactly the same. And, I am not going to talk about facial features. If you don't know, look it up. "What did you want to talk about, Naruto-kun?" Yugito asked as they both sweated slightly. Throwing the scroll to them, to which Fu caught, they opened it to read the contents. A series of emotions played across their faces, most notably confusion, coldness, then finally anger. Throwing the scroll back to him, Fu told him what they felt about the alliance. "How dare they try to involve us into their war, and instead of making us worried they should have just come clean and say that they need our help badly," Fu stated loudly. "Yeah, after everything that they have done to innocent people they dare say that they are justifiable. Especially to Jinchuriki. They treated us like vermin. In fact only Killer B got any kind of recognition, and that only happened when he was in his late 30s. Kumo was under attack and he almost died in the process," Yugito added. Running a hand through his still spiky blonde hair, he replied with a sigh, "Yeah, I know, but there are still people who are being harmed because of Madara and Orochimaru, and to be honest, I would rather choose the lesser of the two evils here. The hidden villages may have hurt innocent lives as well, but most of that I know was done unintentional. The only time that didn't happen was with us containers specifically and not everyone in general." Both Yugito and Fu's expression softened at that. Despite the harm done to him by Konoha, he was still willing to ally with them if it meant the safety of innocent people. It was one of those qualities that made people open up to him or try to befriend him. What Konoha had done was throw away a diamond in the rough, and in the end what was Konoha's loss became the West's gain. Thinking over it a little more, they looked at each other for a moment before nodding back to him, to which he pressed a different button on the intercom that connected him to the communications department. "Fuki-san, can you please send a message to Konoha to tell them that I will meet them in the other cages about an alliance at the Naha port, and that is an actual in Japan. If you were wondering, in Kurigakure 2 days from now. Also inform them the reason why the Naha port was chosen was because of the amount of space needed for our arrival," Naruto said as he took his finger off the button. A second later he heard a female's voice reply back. "Yes, Uzukage-sama, right away." The intercom then went silent. After that was over, he walked over towards his wives and gave them both a kiss on the lips before flashing to their shared room in the Uzukage's mansion. For that night the mansion of the Uzukage was loud with moans and sounds of flesh smacking flesh. One day later in Konoha, Tsunade sat behind her desk in the Hokage Tower in worry as she held the letter that had arrived from the UWN, shortened version of United Whirlpool Nation, that morning. Standing in the room with her were the other 4 cages. Meitarumi the Mizukage, Anaki the Tsuchikage, Gara no Sabaku the Kazekage. Finally there was A the Raikage. Standing with them also was Mifune the samurai, leader of the Land of Iron and representative of the smaller hidden villages that couldn't have a cage. Looking at the letter in front of them on the desk, they studied it, and if they were honest, it looked weird to them. Instead of a sealed scroll, they got a light brown, rectangular envelope that was sealed on the back. The address read: Tsunade Senju, Hokage, Hokage Tower, Konohagakure. Elemental Nations. Then in the top right-hand corner was a blue stamp with a white swirl in the center. Looking to her fellow cages in confusion, she asked them what was on their mind. "Well, it seems that they have started using alternate means of communication, but let's see what they sent back," Mei offered, receiving numerous nods the room's other occupants. Turning over the letter and breaking the seal, Tsunade took out the reply and read it aloud for everyone to hear it. "Dear leaders of the Elemental Nations, I have recently received your letter containing the want for an alliance, and I must say it was a shock to say the least. I have given it consideration and have decided that an alliance may be possible if we talked face to face, so I will meet all of you at the Naha port in Kurigakure tomorrow in the evening. The reason for this is because of the space needed for our arrival. Also, I will be bringing some guards with me for protection, so feel free to bring some along as well. On a more serious note, please do not send any ninja through unauthorized, or it will be taken as an act of aggression on your side and an alliance will be impossible. Yours sincerely, NU, Uzukage of the United Whirlpool Nation." Just below that was another swirl, only red instead of white. "I have seen that swirl before," Anaki muttered as he saw a look of recognition appear on the faces of the Raikage and Hokage as well, though the reason was different. "That's the symbol of Konoha. Who does he think he is using our symbol? When he comes here, I should demand he remove it and pay compensation to us for forgery," Tsunade ranted until she was interrupted by a cough from the Raikage and the Tsuchikage. "Actually, Tsunade dono, it is the other way round," A said as he saw Tsunade raise an eyebrow in confusion. Seeing A's reluctance to continue because of his predecessor's mistakes, Anaki decided to pick up from there. "You see, Tsunade dono, that symbol originally came from the Uzumaki clan in Uzushiogakure. Due to their close connection with the Senju clan, the Uzumaki clan gave permission to Konoha to use their symbol as a sign of friendship. The symbol is now shown on the leaf headbands and on the back of the Chunin and Jonin flak vests. Also, the last initial of his name is U. This could mean Uzumaki. So whoever this NU is, they could very well have all rights to the symbol, even retire it if they want to. The reason why Raikage Dono here is reluctant to continue is because during the Third Shinobi War, Kumo tried to kidnap an Uzumaki but was foiled by the Yondaime Hokage, who was a Chunin, and was he a Chunin at the time? At the time, Anaki finished as he saw the embarrassed blush that the Hokage was now adorning. It shouldn't have been news to her, especially since she was the Hokage and a Senju to boot. It was then that Tsunade realized how important the Uzumaki were to Konoha's founding. Without them, the Senju and Uchiha would have never found a neutral country to negotiate in and would have kept on fighting. How when Madara first used the Kyuubi to attack Konoha Mito Uzumaki, her own grandmother, sealed it within herself to protect them. Then the abuse that one Naruto Uzumaki suffered at the hands of a village that prides itself on his symbol. Finally, the fact that the academy didn't teach anything about the Uzumaki clan was the salt added to the injury. Konoha had taken everything that belonged to the Uzumaki clan, yet gave nothing in return, claimed what was the Uzumakis as their own and abused the last of its members. It was one of the most awful betrayals that could be committed in the elemental nations. How is he supposed to get there the next day? It took 3 days for the scroll to reach him. How is he going to cross the sea that splits the east and west apart? It's nearly impossible for us to cross it, May stated, wanting to get back to the topic at hand. Shaking her head to clear her thoughts, she made a mental note to right the wrongs Konoha has made. Starting with the Uzumaki clan. I don't know, maybe they'll surprise us again. For now though, I think it best that we retire for the day and we all should meet at the Naha port tomorrow evening, as it said in the reply, Mifune said as he bowed in respect and left along with the other cages. After bidding the other leaders goodbye, she looked at current Jonins to decide who were best to bring along. Ichiraku Ramen Stand. The stand was unusually quiet as the customers ate their food in silence. Before Naruto's banishment, this place used to be filled with laughter from friends and family. After his banishment, it became as quiet as a ghost town. When they got the news, Toichi threw out anybody who insulted his favorite customer, and his daughter Ayame had locked herself in her room and didn't come out for a whole day. Apparently she had a small crush on the blonde but didn't do anything because of his crush on Sakura at the time. Afterwards she was cold to all of the Konoha 11 who badmouthed or had a hand in Naruto's suffering. Inside the bar, sitting on the bar stools to the ramen stand, were Hinata and Neji Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka and his partner Akamaru, Ino Yamanaka and Tenten. All of them had depressed auras about them as they constantly reminded themselves of the pain they had caused to Naruto just before he was banished, since today would be the 10-year anniversary that it occurred. I still can't forgive myself for abusing him like that. I mean, we all thought that Naruto had almost killed the Tem when we caught word of how badly wounded he was. Not once did we think that Naruto himself would be wounded, Kiba said, with Akamaru whining in agreement. I know, and then when Tsunade called us to ask us about his condition before leaving, sob. We told her and then said we were glad we did it, sob. Hinata sobbed as she couldn't get rid of the look of betrayal from the blonde when she and the others had delivered their punishment. Neji rubbed the back of his cousin as she sobbed with her back hunched. Truth be told, if anyone suffered the most out of them, it was Hinata. The girl had a huge crush on Naruto since the academy and didn't have the courage to ask him out. Now she most likely never will have a chance with him, since despite Naruto giving her confidence at the Chunin exams, she didn't return it. Instead she, along with himself, used a painful but non-lethal Juken strike to slowly torture him along with the others. In fact, when Ayame and Toichi heard about their involvement, they banned them along with Sakura and Sasuke from stepping foot in the stand. Out of the whole Konoha 11 at the time, only Shikamaru, Shino, Choji and Lee were still allowed to eat there. Eventually, after many apologies and begging, Hinata, Neji, Kiba, Ino and Tenten were allowed back into the stand but were now treated with indifference until Naruto said otherwise. That in itself was unlikely to happen since he wasn't allowed in the village anymore. Thinking about Naruto made them recollect the meeting they had with Tsunade just after Naruto's banishment. Flashback. After Naruto had been forced to leave, Tsunade called all of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy and their sensei to appear in her office to discuss the Sasuke retrieval mission. Which brings us to the now filled up Hokage's office. Tsunade herself sat behind her desk, with her elbows leaning on the desk, her fingers interlocked, that consequently hid her mouth slightly and had a serious look about her. In front of her stood the, now, Konoha 11 with their sensei behind them respectively. On her far left were Team Guy, Team 8 on her close left, Team 7 on her close right and Team 10 on her far right. Looking at each team briefly, she decided it was time to begin the meeting. Okay, as you all know, just minutes ago Naruto Uzumaki was banished for hurting Sasuke Uchiha on the retrieval mission that finished recently. Now before Naruto was put in a holding cell he was perfectly healthy and fit. Now the thing was, when he was being escorted to the gates I noticed several things. Firstly, he had his tenketsu in his stomach closed off, that can very painful. Secondly, he had bruising around his chest area from a punch or kick, as well as similar bruising to his head. Thirdly, he had multiple scars on his arms from what looked like kunai wounds. Lastly, he smelled of dog urine when he walked by me. Now can anyone here tell me why he was in that condition when you were the last ones to see him in his cell? She questioned them in a tone that said she knew who did it and just wanted them to deny it. Sasuke snorted by saying, yeah, we did it. I punched him in chest, Sakura the head and Ino kicked him when he fell to the ground, Hinata and Neji closed his tenketsu and Tenten cut him up with her kunai. What does it matter though? After all he did deserve it for almost killing me. This shocked Tsunade, even more so when said shinobi nodded their heads in agreement. Raising her eyebrow she decided to get more information. And didn't they stop to think that Naruto had been hurt as well, she questioned as the previously mentioned people looked confused at what she meant. However this time it was Shikamaru who answered. Hokage-sama, I thought there was more to it along with Choji, Shino and Lee. So we went to Shizune to ask about his injuries. Naruto was already in a prison cell at the time. After we found out about his injuries we ran as fast as we could to stop the others but it was too late as they had already tortured and visiting hours had ended with them, Shikamaru finished explaining as those who didn't know about Naruto's condition widened their eyes at the revelation. All but one that is. Oh please what could the Dobi have had suffered at my hands when he showed a Rasengan into my chest that burned away my skin, Sasuke stated with a snobbish tone. How about a punctured lung from a Chidori, Tsunade countered as everyone's, except for those who already knew and Sasuke and Sakura, eyes widened in horror at the realization at what they had done to the blonde ex-shinobi. They had jumped to conclusions without getting the full story from both sides. Kakashi felt like he was just as bad as the villagers who had abused Naruto because of the Kyuubi, it was worse because it had been his jutsu that Sasuke had used to force Naruto to use the Rasengan and then he had the audacity to scold Naruto that badly. I mean he thought he told Sasuke to not use that jutsu on comrades but it seemed that he didn't listen and Naruto paid the price for it. In more ways than one. Minato-sensei, Kushina Nichan. I'm a horrible person. I took everything you taught me and threw it out the window. Same with Obito, he said that comrades who abandon others are worse than trash and I did exactly that with Naruto. I failed you all, Kakashi inwardly sobbed. On the outside only a lone tear fell out of his exposed eye as well as his body started shaking slightly. Quickly before anyone could talk to him he shunshined to his apartment where he proceeded to cry himself to unconsciousness. When Kakashi shunshined everyone, minus Tsunade and surprisingly the remaining Jonin-sensei, wondered why the copycat nin disappeared. Tsunade looked towards the Jonin-sensei and noticed that they too had come to the same conclusion that Kakashi must have done something to Naruto as well the genin, but not physical. Once a moment had passed the genin remembered how each one of them slowly tormented the blonde and the look of betrayal and extreme sadness in his eyes as they stabbed a piece of his soul with every second of their punishment. Tenten, Ino and Hinata dropped to the floor sobbing and crying at the pain they caused unnecessarily to one of their friends that could very well have totally ended their ties with him. Neji, Kiba and Akamaru bowed their heads in shame as they felt the glaring gazes of their sensei on their backs. Shikamaru, Choji, Shino and Lee just looked at their comrades get swallowed up by their shame. To be honest they didn't want them to suffer, but they needed to learn the lessons of think before acting and that actions have consequences. They were disgusted though when Sasuke smirked in his usual arrogant way. So I did more damage because my jutsu was stronger, shows the Dobi was nothing more than that. That's where you're wrong Uchiha, Tsunade said cutting off the raven-haired nin. Seeing this caused the Uchiha to a confused and angry expression that made Tsunade give a small grin in triumph. You see Uchiha at one point in the past Jiraiya told me of when he and Kakashi did the same thing. The outcome was that Kakashi had the same wound as you and Jiraiya told me that he had to hold back or it would have killed Kakashi. Therefore Naruto held back in order to not kill you so that he could bring you back alive. Tsunade finished as both Sasuke and Sakura scowled at the news. Sakura was about to yell something but was stopped by the glare and killing intent ki being directed at her from the busty blonde cage. Okay now that has been taken care of I must issue punishments to some of you because of your reckless and violent actions. Naruto was inside a prison cell and unless being interrogated all prisoners must not be subject to verbal or physical pain. You all did both, therefore your punishment will be no new training from anybody, clans and family included, you may though train in what you already know. Next you will only take D-ranked missions for the next 6 months and will not be allowed to take part in the Chunin exams that also will take place in 6 months. This will apply to Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka along with Akamaru, Neji Hyuga and Tenten. Kakashi Hitaki will be given his punishment next time I summon him. In the meantime Shino Aburame, Choji Akamichi and Rock Lee will form a temporary team to enter the Chunin exams if their sensei are willing to agree at the time. Dismissed, Tsunade informed everyone in an official tone as the Jonins vanished via Shunshin and the Genin and the newly promoted Chunin walked out the door. End flashback. The next day they had heard that the elders of the council had barged into the Hokage's office and demanded that the Uchiha be pardoned of his punishment. The Hokage's response was to be thrown out of her office by herself and told in a cold tone to not just barge into her office like they owned the place. She also added that she would not lift the Uchiha's punishment no matter what they said or did. From there on they had started to see how pampered and arrogant the Uchiha was. Later on they heard that Kakashi had been punished by being forbidden from reading his ICHA series for 6 months, and he would be given many other punishments if he was even late by 1 minute to any meeting for the same period of time. Many of the Konoha 11 thought it was unfair, but they discovered that Kakashi had only verbally abused Naruto, not physically, and so couldn't be punished as severely as them. What really was eventful was when we found out about the Kyuubi and his heritage when Jiraiya-sama stormed into Tsunade-sama's office when he heard the news of Naruto banishment. Neji added as he remembered how pissed the Sannin was when he arrived. It had been 1 year since Naruto's banishment, and the Konoha 11 and the Konohamaru Corps had just finished a joint D-rank mission when the man all but blasted the doors off their hinges and then proceeded to shout out why Naruto's name had been erased from the Toad contract and how could she had let Naruto's banishment happen. She replied that she couldn't control the decision made when even the Hyuga clan supported the motion. Jiraiya had then yelled out how Naruto was now a target for Akatsuki. In his haste he had forgotten that the Konoha 11 had been present, and after being pressured by them, they eventually broke and told them about the Kyuubi being sealed inside of him since birth. All of the Konoha 11, minus Sasuke and Sakura, and the Konohamaru Corps were shocked at the news and soon had a newfound respect for Naruto when they remembered how badly his mission records were. Soon though it dawned on them that some of them were just as bad as the villagers, since they did exactly the same thing to him when he was being held in a prison cell. Sasuke and Sakura though had believed that he was the Kyuubi itself and continued to badmouth him. Soon Sakura made a comment about how his parents were likely a drunk and a prostitute. She had then been violently slammed against wall by an angry toad sage who yelled out his parents were great ninja. This had raised questions from everyone, except Tsunade, about how he knew Naruto's parents when nobody else did. He then couldn't avoid it and told them that his parents were the Yondaime Hokage and the Chichiyo no Habanero. The reactions were mixed. Sakura and Sasuke denied it, saying that they were geniuses and he was a dobe. The others though saw the connections that made him reflect the two people. He had the same blue eyes and spiky hair of the Yondaime, but had the facial structure and personality of the Chichiyo no Habanero, plus the fact it was known that Kushina was Minato's wife and that her name was Uzumaki. It made all of them even more ashamed of themselves. The Genins and Kakashi, because they realized how they had just spat on their heroes' legacies. The Kunoichi all looked up to Kushina and the shinobi had all adored the Yondaime. Tenten had then asked why he had failed 3 times, to which Tsunade responded that the first 2 times he was sabotaged to fail and that the Sandaime hadn't picked up on. His actual results would have been about average had they not been tempered with, and because he would achieve sometimes in school, parents would arrange mobs to beat the boy whenever he did something well. This had then given him the impression that succeeding was bad behavior, so when it came down to their generation it was already too late. He had completely foregone training and nothing Iruka did encouraged him to try working hard again. This made many of the Jonin sensei despise themselves, as they had assumed that Naruto was a clown that did what he did because he could. Not because he needed to do it for his survival or that he was conditioned to be like that, especially when they heard how he passed and became a genin. Then when the other nations heard about Naruto's banishment, they started cutting off ties with us. First was wave, then snow, then tea, and we almost lost sand as well if it wasn't for Gaara saying that Naruto wouldn't want him to abandon the few people who were nice to him. Though our alliance is greatly strained and even though they will still help us in a war, they will not aid us in any way in peacetime. Ino said as they briefly remembered how furious Gaara had been when he got the news of Naruto's banishment. His sand had nearly on instinct killed the council if it wasn't for his sister, who calmed him down. Gaara then proposed that when Naruto met him again he would allow Temari to marry him, since apparently she had had a small crush on the boy as well when the Chunin exams finished. He then also stated how if he was to meet Naruto again then it would be his choice on if he should stay with Konoha or not. It had caused an uproar with the civilian council, but after a burst of ki from the Hokage they promptly shut up. Then when the Yondaime's possessions destroyed themselves and Naruto's heritage was fully revealed, the council tried to bring him back, but because he cut off his ties to the toads we can't find him. Not that I blame him, Ino continued until the rest of them had finished eating. Yeah, well, now you know to get the whole story, instead of doing something based on only one side and not looking further into it, Toichi stated passively as he took their now empty bowls of ramen and gave them the bill for the food. Sighing the Chunins and Jonin, Neji is the only Jonin along with Shino, Shikamaru, Temari and Kankuro, paid for their meals and left the stand with gloom looks. As they pushed the curtains aside to walk out into the street, they saw a thoughtful Kakashi walking past them, and surprisingly without his erotic novels that Jiraiya wrote. The man himself had his head tilted to look at the floor, holding his chin in his left hand and his other hand in his pocket as he walked through the crowd. Kakashi-sensei, what is it that has caused you to be seen without your porn? They not have your favorite ICHA? Kiba joked in the hopes of lifting everyone's spirits up and get back to the present instead of dwindling on the past. Said Jonin looked at them, and his exposed eye closed in what people could only interpret a smile. Hi there, Kiba, and no, that is not the reason. Apparently the cages are trying to ally with the United Whirlpool Nation, and it would appear that Guy and I have been selected to be Tsunade-sama's guards for the meeting. The other cages and the representative of the minor nations will also have 2 guards with them, Kakashi informed them. The response he got were many confused expressions being directed his way. Kiba, though, was the one to ask the question that was won their mind. What? Why do we need the help of a country that can't even use chakra? I mean, they won't be of much help since they can't even perform jutsu right. Lee may not be able to use chakra, but he could at least use the 8 inner gates, whereas those of the West can't. Quote. The thing though, Kiba, is that our leaders have come up with a hypothesis that the West have developed in a way we might not have imagined. An example of this would be that the cages received the UWN's reply to their scroll today, and that it stated that it had been sent the day before. That kind of journey would normally take 3 days to arrive, but they did it in a third of the time. Sigh. Well, I have to get ready to meet the Hokage at the gates tomorrow morning, so, John A., Kakashi replied as he continued walking towards his apartment to prepare for the imminent meeting between the leaders of the elemental nations and the leader of the United Whirlpool Nation. The shinobi and villagers who had heard what the Jonin had said began to worry, as they knew that the war against the Akatsuki was going bad. They just didn't know it was that bad. Meanwhile, with the Akatsuki, it would appear that the Shinobi Alliance have turned to the west for help, Madara Uchiha said as he glanced at the figures that resided with him in the cave that contained the statue that held the biju that they had collected. Over time their numbers had diminished to him, Zetsu, Deidara, Sasori, and their temporary ally Orochimaru. Itachi Uchiha had been killed by himself when he tried to kill him with his back turned. It turned out that the man had never truly betrayed Konoha and had been ordered to massacre the Uchiha clan and then join their organization in order to keep track of them. Kisame Hoshigaki had been killed when he tried to take on the Hachibi's Jinchuriki. The man had been able to defeat him, but not before falling unconscious and becoming easy for Madara to come and take him without resistance. Kakazu and Hidan had been killed by the Nibi's Jinchuriki and an unknown man that they still hadn't identified. The reason why the zombie brothers were dead when people thought they couldn't die was because their bodies were completely obliterated so that nothing was left. Pain, or Nagato as he was called, and Konan had been killed by Madara himself when he decided that he wanted one of his Rinnegan eyes. The pair had put up a tough fight that had even left Madara wounded for weeks before he fully recovered, only to end up with destroyed Rinnegan eyes that were useless to him. We should easily beat them, They can't even use chakra, Deidara boasted as he flexed the mouths on his hands. Shut up, Deidara. You shouldn't judge people on appearances alone, Sasori advised as the others nodded along with him in agreement. Coo, I'll have my spies work on their strengths and we will see if they are a threat. After all, I don't want any more extra obstacles between me and Sasuke-kun, Orochimaru hissed with a smirk in place as he summoned Kabuto to send a message to his spies. No matter. Zetsu, I want you to do the same, as I don't trust the snake to give us all the information he acquires, Madara stated. As you wish, Zetsu replied as he sank into the ground, vanishing from view. Time skip, morning Konoha. Take care and good luck, Tsunade-sama, Hinata shouted as her and the other shinobi and villagers stood at the gate to bid her goodbye. I will, Hinata. Take care everyone, we should be back the next day or the day after, Tsunade replied as she, Guy and Kakashi waved farewell and started their trip to the Naha port in Kurigakure. IWA. Kuretsuchi-sama, look after Tsuchikage-sama, an IWA villager shouted as said person grinned and waved in response. She and Akatsuchi were her grandfather's bodyguards for the meeting and were just about to set off. If the Tsuchikage's back hadn't thrown itself out when he tried pick up a backpack. Ow, damn this traitorous back of mine. Told ya you were too old to have the hat, maybe you should hand it over to me now while we have the chance, Kuretsuchi joked as she only received a death glare from the Tsuchikage. HMPH, Aniki replied before all three used their ability to fly to get to the Naha port on time for the meeting with the cheers, and in some cases laughing, of the villagers and shinobi behind them. Kiri. Make sure you take care of Mei-sama, Aoi, Chojuro, the mist shinobi shouted as they and the other villagers gave similar words of encouragement. No worries. By the time we come back the alliance hopefully we will have another ally to help us in our struggle, May announced as her villagers cheered in response. Let's go. We should be the first to arrive considering the port is in our nation, May said as the trio made their way past the gates to their village. Hi, May-sama, a nervous Jojiro said as he received a whack to the back of his head from Aoi. In my time men didn't break down like that. Break, May thought as a dark aura started to appear around her. I mean what happens when you are up and in an engagement with the enemy. Single quote. Up. Engagement, May continued to think. Her dark aura becoming more dense. Turning to Aoi and closing her only visible her she gave him a sickly sweet smile as she said in an equally toned voice. Aoi, shut up or I'll kill you. What did I do wrong? Aoi exasperated as he jumped back a few steps in fright. Kumo. Darui, see. Make sure Raikage-sama is safe and keep him in line. Don't want his emotions to get in the way if he screws up. Kami he almost did during the Gokage summit, Mabui said with amusement in her eyes as she and other villagers and shinobi bid their Raikage luck with gaining another ally. Don't worry Mabui-san. Raikage-sama will keep his emotions in check. Right Raikage-sama, C questioned as his companion smirked at the slight sweat the Raikage had when he was questioned. Why yeah sure, clears his throat. Well come on now Darui, see, let's go before we are late, stuttered slightly before recovering and finishing with a conviction in his voice that made many of the others smirk at the Raikage's slip-up in posture from his usually stuck-up personality. Many hours later at the Naha port. The port itself was very large. The docking being large enough to hold a whole street. Problem with this design being that the town in the port being small and compact in order to not use up any more space. Originally it was designed to hold what the elemental nations deemed as deep sea ships that could not go into the shallows. What they didn't take into account was that there were vessels that were even larger than what they saw as deep sea ships, and that is exactly what the 5 cages and Mifune were facing, for in front of them a long way away was a huge ship that was made of metal. They also noticed that it also contained other metal-like things and that it could carry more men than they thought possible. And CV-67 aircraft carrier. Oh my, Tsunade stated as she and the other leaders of the alliance could only nod in surprise at how orderly the UWN's forces were. It was then they noticed that a number of differently clothed men boarded the strange metal objects that were resting on the deck of the ship. They then saw the blades on top of the objects start to spin at blinding speeds and, much to their shock, the objects started to fly in their direction. That was a feat that only the Tsuchikage and his top shinobi could perform. As they got closer they heard the chopping noise the objects made and saw the uniforms that, what they could only presume as the soldiers wore, were very odd to them. Imagine Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 US Rangers, Desert version. The objects seemed to form a backwards triangle with the 2 on either side of the middle one further in front. Eventually they felt the force being projected from the rotating blades and had to use their arms to shield themselves from the dust being kicked up. My what youthful ideas the West have brought, Guy shouted, seemingly unaffected by the force being exerted. Though none were surprised given his insane training routine and his specialization in taijutsu. Soon the objects landed and once the blades started to slow down the soldiers disembarked carrying weird objects Colt M16A2 from their transports and lined up on either side to form a path perpendicular to the middle transport. And, just like in Star Wars 4 when Darth Vader disembarks from his fighter in the Death Star. They then saw 3 figures stand up from the transport in rather unique-looking armor. They are dressed as Raiden from MGS4, including a trench coat. Only difference is that Naruto's is black, Yugito's blue and Fu's green. Also it is entirely removable. They have dual Fabrique Nationale 5.7 on their sides and they each have a Colt M4A1 Sopmod strapped to their back. Naruto has a shotgun attachment, Yugito has a foregrip and Fu has a grenade launcher. All 3 also have ACOG scopes. Add in the usual daggers and serrated sword and that's their outfit completed. Once the leaders got a clear sight at the 3 they could only stare with open mouths in shock. They were none other than the only Jinchuriki that Madara still did not possess yet. Tsunade, Kakashi, Guy, A, Darui and C were more affected than the others. Especially when they saw the sunny blonde hair of Naruto and the pale blonde hair of Yugito. And Fu's leader Shibuki can't be present as he is represented by Mifune. Walking down past his soldiers, who saluted him as he passed, Naruto made his way to the shocked leaders and he and his wives couldn't help but smirk at the frozen looks that were plastered on the leaders of the elemental nations' faces. Once he was in front of Tsunade he gave a small chuckle that made her pay attention to him specifically rather than absently. Well Abasan, it appears that you are in need of some help. Why don't we find a better place to talk about this alliance that you and the others want?